Hi, my name is Sophia and this is my presentation, Why Are Linguistic Features and PTSD Symptoms Related? An Analysis of Cognitive Reappraisal and Rumination. So, written narratives of trauma are used a lot in treatments of PTSD, and they're also used a lot in research of PTSD. They're specifically researched in the context of a program called Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, or also called LIWC. This program basically measures the amount of words for a particular linguistic dimension. So some of the linguistic predictors in LIWC that I'm really interested in are cognitive processing language, self-referential language, deaf language, and sensory language. On this page, you can see some examples that are in the dictionary of these words, the dictionary of LIWC. So past literature in this area of trauma narratives suggests a really strong history of cognitive processing language being negatively associated with PTSD symptoms and self-referential language being positively associated with PTSD symptoms. The only thing is not a lot of research, if any, uh, looks into why these associations exist between these findings. So in my study, my first set of hypotheses is trying to replicate some of the past findings in the literature, specifically sensory language, self-referential language, and deaf language being associated positively with total CAP score or total PTSD symptom severity, and the opposite for cognitive processing language, that it would be negatively associated with total PTSD symptom severity. Then there are my cognitive processing and self-referential language hypotheses. So I hypothesize that the reason for the association between self-referential language and PTSD symptoms that are often found in the literature is because of rumination. And I hypothesize that the mechanism behind cognitive processing words in PTSD being related to one another is cognitive reappraisal. And then I also wanted to look at whether or not trauma type impacted linguistic dimensions and trauma narratives in any way. By trauma type, I mean interpersonal or non-interpersonal, so basically traumas with a perpetrator versus traumas without a perpetrator. So I had 185 participants total in this study. Only 157 participants were used for the actual analyses. I had to exclude some participants due to not all of their surveys being completed or their narratives not being completed. As you can see here, we had a kind of equal amount of interpersonal trauma and non-interpersonal trauma in the study for the participants involved. We had about 60% interpersonal trauma and 40% non-interpersonal trauma. So for that first set of hypotheses for the linguistic dimensions for the results that I was trying to replicate from past research, I unfortunately failed to replicate those past findings. And something interesting that I did find is that the cognitive processing dimension was in the opposite direction of what I anticipated, even though it still wasn't significant. And so to kind of figure out why this happened, there's some subtypes of the cognitive processing dimension in LIWC that you can run, and I found that the subtypes of tentativeness and differentiation were significant and associated positively with PTSD symptom severity. Tentativeness is words such as maybe, perhaps, and differentiation is words such as but and hasn't. My second set of hypotheses was also non-significant because it was based on that first set. So I did not find any results that were significant related to rumination and cognitive reappraisal in terms of the linguistic dimensions. I also did not find any significant results for the exploratory question I had, but I did find that non-interpersonal trauma had a negative relationship with total CAP score. So people with interpersonal traumas or traumas with a perpetrator had more PTSD symptoms on average, which is consistent with prior literature. So even though I didn't find anything significant with this study, except for the two subtypes in the cognitive processing dimension being positively associated with PTSD symptom severity. I've still, just by doing this study, kind of opened up the trauma narrative field to a new way of looking at these common findings, of trying to figure out why they're happening instead of trying to replicate them again. Future research in linguistic narratives of trauma should consider these other forms of indicating overall symptom severity, and also invest in huge studies that look at a ton of different trauma narratives with a really long word count. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.